Bob Monroe, who started the Monroe Institute. He was interested in all kinds of cool stuff and the utilization of technology to expand consciousnesses in multiple places. So now they got courses on how to reach out and communicate with extraterrestrial entities. One of their programs reaches out to lost souls that haven't found their way to their final destination after their death. And like in the case of Joe McMoneagle, was remote viewer number 1 for the Army Intelligence and CIA program that they put together. His evidence is irrefutable. Like, that's on government record that he did all this stuff and was able to go to other places from his living room in Virginia and then out an entire nuclear sub-program for the Russian military. How do you expand somebody's consciousness, or how do you increase their level of psychic abilities? It's crazy stuff that they were investigating back then.
But is the focus remote viewing, or is there other aspects of consciousness that they're researching as well?
There are other aspects. They're number one in remote viewing because of their history of helping to develop a training program for the CIA and military industrial remote viewers that they developed the program for. They trained the people in the government who were remote viewers for a number of years before they actually had their own program set up internally. So that's kind of their pedigree and their history, is being the top place that trained all the remote viewers and put together a training program that allowed for people to do that kind of cool stuff. But then they branched out into other stuff, like Bob Monroe, who started the Monroe Institute, who's no longer with us. He was interested in all kinds of cool stuff and the utilization of technology to expand consciousnesses in multiple places. So now they got courses on how to reach out and communicate with extraterrestrial entities, like, some crazy fringe stuff. But they also have other stuff like how to train yourself for potentially having out-of-body experiences and extending your consciousness out to go see things, not in a remote viewing fashion, but to go see other places and other things that aren't local to your body consciousness. And they've got all kinds of stuff, and they do some, it's almost like a philanthropy or an outreach to spirits. One of their programs reaches out to lost souls that haven't found their way to their final destination after their death. They're confused about, where they are and what happened, and yada, yada, yada. They lost their life suddenly and they're just wandering around. And they have a program that's designed to help go out and reach those folks and lead them into a place where they can, finally get to their final destination. It's like, and there's science up there that helps validate a lot of what they're doing in the physical realm, to say there's evidence that proves that this stuff is effective. There's evidence, and like in the case of Joe McMoneagle, who was remote viewer number 1 for the Army Intelligence and CIA program that they put together, his evidence is irrefutable. Like, that's on government record that he did all this stuff and was able to go to other places from his living room in Virginia and then out an entire nuclear sub-program for the Russian military, where he was the only one in the room who drew the sub with all these characteristics, and then it proved to be completely accurate. And he drew it from his living room in Virginia.
That is the most remarkable. When we spoke on the phone,
yeah,
and you told me about that is the most remarkable remote viewing piece of information I've ever heard.
That's not even his best one, but it's pretty impressive. You want me to tell the story?
Not yet. We'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll get to that. I want to stick with the Monroe Institute, Bob Monroe.
Yeah.
And how long has the Monroe Institute been around?
Since the 60s, I believe.
Since the 60s?
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in what you know. So the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and the Monroe Institute collaborated. A substantial amount of money was poured into the Monroe Institute to research. Is it research and develop, or did it start with research with remote viewing?
Well, the story that I got on the origin of Monroe Institute was that Bob Monroe was just simply interested in trying to figure out what technologies could assist with consciousness expansion. And he put together some programs, and all they had were gateway experiences back in the day. And
what is a gateway experience?
So the gateway is Bob's method of introducing binaural frequencies to where, for instance, you have 100 hertz in one ear and 104 hertz in the other ear. You can hear them both, but you can't hear 4 hertz normally. It's below our audible level. But if you put two signals in your ears, right and left, that have a difference of 4 hertz, your brain then starts activating in a way to try to resolve that, and it turns on things because that's specifically right in the delta and theta transition area, and it can turn on experiences in your mind that would not normally be turned on in your consciousness. And so it gives you different experiences of consciousness. And so he started to experiment with that kind of technology, and that program, the Gateway, was introducing people into different levels of consciousness where you could experience deeper levels of concentration aided by the technology that they were putting in headphones, right? And so there's this guy, Skip, who was instructed to put together the remote viewing program for the military and CIA because they were getting reports that Russia was doing the same thing, that they were using psychics to look inside the secrets of the United States. So they needed to do an analysis of what kind of risk they were talking about and whether the United States should also investigate that type of technology.
Russia's doing this too.
Yeah, Russia was doing it at the time, and we were getting reports about it.
So they were ahead of us on this.
Yeah.
Is anybody else doing this that you're aware of?
From what I understand, although no one would admit it, every major country in the United States is implementing this type of program. Or excuse me, every major country in the world is implementing this. Like every first world nation is implementing this in their intelligence communities.
Wow.
Yeah, but no one wants to talk about it because, first of all, it's woo-woo crazy stuff. Mm-hmm. And second, you don't want to identify your best viewers because, for instance, like Joe was attempted assassinated 3 times.
Hey, you know what? People listening right now that think this is woo-woo, do a Google search, do a DuckDuckGo search, do a whatever the hell you want search, and just Google Monroe Institute, CIA, and the shit's going to come up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
there you go. For all of you people that still believe in, that you got to hear it from a government source.
Yeah.
Which I can't believe, whatever. But there it is. It's right there.
Yeah, I mean, they invested millions of dollars in Monroe. Skip, their old program director for remote viewing, came down and was just researching, trying to figure out what a training program might look like for a remote viewer. How do you expand somebody's consciousness, or how do you increase their level of psychic abilities? This is crazy stuff that they were investigating back then, but they wanted to make sure they weren't investing money in a bad way, or they weren't wasting it on charlatans, that type of thing. So he would go out to these places and investigate them. And Bob basically took him around, gave him a tour, but put him in a radio-shielded room with a pair of headphones on, started playing some tones in his ears, and Skip started floating up out of his body. So he thought that was pretty interesting. And so he put Monroe on a short list of places to investigate after he identified some folks who could possibly be good remote viewers. And so then he devised the idea that he said, okay, so we're looking for folks in the intelligence community. How do we find, who might be the psychics? And he looked for folks who were in their jobs longer than they should be. Because he thought, just as a common sense perspective, if these people are tuned into something extra, it's going to be the folks who are surviving longer in a shorter life expectancy job because they're making the right choices at the right times to stay alive. And it just so happened that Joe McMoneagle, who was remote viewer number 1, he had spent 14 years in the field as an operative. And he was in a job that the life expectancy was 20 months, and he had spent 14 years in that job. So they yanked him in and started interrogating him to ask him to, see if he was a double agent and was getting fed information on the other side. And when they figured out he wasn't, they sent him to Stanford Research Institute for testing, where Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, which I'm sure those names will ring some bells for folks who are interested in extraterrestrial stuff, because Hal's at the top of that chain as well. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ were developing a program to try to test remote viewers, and they sent Joe McMoneagle out there, and he tested off the charts. He nailed every one of their tests except for one, and he got a second place result on the last one.
What are some of these tests?
So basically the tests were, we have a target, you don't know who it is, and that target, through a double-blind process, has been instructed to go to a location. The target doesn't know where the target's a person, the target doesn't know where the location is until they're handed the envelope, tell them to go there. The targets have been randomized and put in envelopes, and then a dice gets rolled for a randomization to select where they're going. And the two people are never in the same room. They don't know each other. The remote viewer goes in a radio shielded room that's separated in a different building. And the target, randomized location, they get the envelope, they open it up, they go there. And so then it's the job of the remote viewer to say, okay, your target is at a location. Tell us about the location. And that's it. That's all they get. So then the remote viewer goes into a little bit of a meditation to clear their mind. And Joe's explanation of remote viewing is like, you imagine a cardboard door in front of you, and you poke a hole in it. And you don't see the whole picture, but you start to see a little bit of it. And you get the little pieces of information about things. And he started drawing what he saw on the target location. And he would nail, and now here's the process of how a separate viewing gets viewed. It's a separate judge who isn't connected with the experiment at all, except he's judging the remote viewing versus multiple targets that could exist. So he doesn't know where the target is either. He gets a randomized selection inside a stack of targets, and he has to take the drawing that the remote viewer has made and the information that the remote viewer has written down, like any smells or any sounds or any images or what's, the shape of a building or something like that. And then he or she has to take that remote viewing drawing, and then match it to a number of things that are before him. So he doesn't know the target. He doesn't know the location. He doesn't had contact with the remote viewer or the target. He just takes a drawing and matches it to a bunch of stuff on a wall. And he says, okay, this looks the most like this. It's got this pattern that he drew. It's got this smell of this flower that's in the picture. It's got, whatever it is. And then at that point, you're graded. And if that independent judge has taken the remote viewer's information and matched it to the correct target, that's a first place finish, first place result. And Joe hit first place result after first place result after first place result. And they sent him to Meade at that point to start the remote viewing program. And now he didn't really believe it. He thought this whole thing was an operation on him. Like, how gullible is this guy? Like, can we string him along? How long is he going to be strung along for that we're telling him he's psychic? Although he kind of knew he was psychic because he'd get hints about operations in the jungle, and he was all throughout Vietnam, and he's gone to 110 countries. He's a legit field operative. So he's getting drops. He's going in and talking to tribal chiefs, making treaties and stuff like that. Like, he's a legit operator.